to another episode of the William Branham Historical Research Podcast. I'm your host, John Collins, the author and founder of William Branham Historical Research at william-branham.org, and with me I have my co-host, researcher, and friend, James Goad. And together, we're discussing the very weird things that preachers say, why they say them, and how they relate back to the latter-rain healing revivals of the late 1940s through the 1960s. James, I know this is the moment that you've been waiting for. We've finally made it to the topic of interest for you, and I'll say this for a lot of X-Message people, because this is just one of those, it's one of those means to control children for what is seemingly no apparent reason, but as we'll get into it today, there is a little bit of the method to the madness behind it. But we're getting into a subject that I know I was in a category of people who was in the message who was actually able to do this, while I had many of my peers were not able to do this, and it was confusing for me. So years ago, I dug into this a bit just to study and see, number one, why are they not allowed to do it? Number two, why am I and certain people who are in the quote-unquote cult elite allowed to do it? And I'm excited to get into it. I don't know about you.
Oh yeah, no, this is one of those things that any kid growing up in the message who went to the youth camps and things like that and were under some of the ministers who were more militant against these sorts of things, they'll be able to relate a lot with this episode. So yeah, I'm very interested to get in and take a look and see where this takes us.
Yeah, this one will be fun. So we're getting into video games, and like I said, I was able to play them, and I had a lot of peers that weren't. In many of the rural churches, especially where the minister was elderly, they were strongly forbidden in many of especially in the more fundamentalist flavors of the cult and its splinter groups. Now, when you got into the bigger cities where, a lot of parents would rather their kids stay inside in the safety of the home than to let them go out and play with the neighborhood kids and whatever trouble they might get into, some of those churches actually did allow it. So it got a little bit weird. But so at the top of the cult, there was the Branham family at the top of the message cult. And the peers of the Branham family were allowed to play video games. In fact, I won't give the names, but one person very, very, very close to them had one of the old cocktail Miss Pac-Man game consoles. Not the kind that you stand up, but the kind like you would see in a bar or a pub where you sit down and both players face each other. And at 7 years old, I believe it was, he was able to roll the digits on that game. So that meant I think it's in the millions before it rolls, but he could take one Pac-Man, or Miss Pac-Man, I should say, and make it all the way up to the millions and roll it. And they had that. They had, I want to say it was ColecoVision, one of the old ones. And, I didn't think anything of it because I was never told that this was not allowed. I was in the category of the cult elite. But then whenever I moved to some of the more rural areas in the country, I was a little surprised because those children looked at me like I had a demon for playing video games. And I got my first, I think it was Nintendo Entertainment Center system whenever I was, I want to say high school. It was the second video game system I owned. And I was able to convert a few of them over to the dark side. But my very first gaming console system that I ever owned, I want to say I was in third or fourth grade, and a person who was even closer to the Branham family gave me my first gaming system, and it was called Vectrex, but it was this gaming system that was all in one unit that you could play Asteroids and, a few different of the old school games. The controllers were built into the unit, so you pulled them out, and man, it brings back memories. I want to go dig it out of my parents' attic if they still have it.
Probably be worth something too.
Yeah, it might.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess we should just start off here and start diving into some of these clips that we have to take a look at. But one of the things that you start to see patterns emerging, like you said, some of the generations some of the ministers are elderly and they don't have an idea of really what video games are because they didn't grow up with them. It's just this foreign witchcraft of a thing that seems to be captivating people's imaginations and minds. But then you have some of the younger ministers too, and sometimes you're kind of curious about how they're coming up with some of the things they are too. But yeah, so let's take a look at this one here where a minister appears to be talking about video games as though they're going to ruin your life somehow. But let's take a look and let's dive in further.
This really brings us in a humble condition here. That at that time ye were without Christ. Can you imagine where you'd be without Christ? You would have filthy minds, filthy lives, no holiness, no judgment. You just let anything come that comes. Instead of shutting the door to Satan, you just let Satan in more and more. Where would you be? I told the church I'd probably be addicted to drugs. I'd be a thug with those sports jerseys on with my hat sideways. I live at my mom's house playing video games, smoking and drinking, and that's what I'd be. Can you imagine? But look what grace has done for me, praise God. Hallelujah. Look what grace has done, amen.
So, James, I'm actually glad this guy's no longer living in his mother's basement. This is a double-edged sword because I get what this minister's saying, and to some extent, it's actually a good thing. Anything that you overdo, anything that you overindulge can form maybe not an addiction, but people say you're addicted to video games. There are some studies where the brain releases some endorphins as you're playing, and it gets you into this weird video game high, if you will, but it's not addictive like you can't leave it and come back. But some children overdo it, right? So if this guy truly was of the mentality that he was living in his mother's basement and might never escape unless he found whatever it was that he found, that's a good thing. I'll give him this. What's interesting about this particular clip is something that Charles and I have discussed offline. I don't think we've got into it much in the podcast yet, but whenever a central figure of a cult rises into authoritative control and they begin to lose their mental faculties, which clearly happened with William Branham, and in fact, he admits it in I want to say it's 1963 or 64. He had a serious mental health issue that he was told that he could not be cured of. And if you actually study the transcripts, it progressively gets worse from 1963 to about 1965. We're going to be covering this in one of the upcoming podcasts. But as somebody loses their mental health and they're in a full authoritative control of whatever is the cult of personality that they have manipulated to control, they turn into basically ranting and everything is condemned. And so you'll find these weird statements where the cult leader is going on and on about you're doing this wrong, you're doing that wrong, and they'll lump things in like, and you women with washing machines. Basically everything is evil whenever you reach the point where you've lost full control of mental health. And I don't get the sense that this person who, we won't mention his name, but this minister who says this, he doesn't come across to me as having the mental health issues like the man he's promoting, but I do sense that there's a little bit of this ranting. He's included video games as though that's part of the evil. Now, if he was truly addicted, I'll give him that. Maybe he's overdoing the video games, but that doesn't mean that everybody sitting in his congregation are also going to end up living in their mother's basement forever. You know what I mean?
Right. And that's one of the things you see as, especially you look in how video games have been treated in the realm of politics and religion in a wider realm. I mean, it's just, there's a lot of similarities to how we talked about earlier in other episodes about Harry Potter and how that was treated with the larger religious world and treated like witchcraft. So it's like, we don't even look at the substance. We don't know what it is. We're just afraid of this thing. Ban it completely. We don't even want to understand it. We just want to ban it and get rid of it because obviously it's of the devil. And then you look at how these things can go when they're done healthily. So you have a healthy family who approaches these things from a healthy mindset. Parents, you have parents who are getting older now who grew up with video games, who play video games with their kids in a healthy manner. You know, that's not like we're constantly playing video games, but it's like we do these things together. We share family time. It's a way of interacting. You know, and there's a real healthy environment around video games, and you see healthy approaches to it. But when you get into some of these more fundamentalist movements, and they just condemn it outright. Maybe you have an elderly preacher who doesn't understand the medium, doesn't understand what it is, has never played a video game, and then they just want to condemn it outright and say it's just taking over your mind, and it's going to make you lazy. It's not going to make you, you're not going to be able to hold down a job because all you do is focus on video games. And it's like, man, I really wish you'd actually played a video game and understand what this is before you're going out and trying to tell kids to not do this. It's very troubling sometimes when you see these things being treated that way.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot. I don't know if you watched it, but the Senate hearings on social media over, Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook and the the control of the minds, which, is crazy, fascinating, because I did agree with him to some extent. But you had these really, really old senators and congressmen and politicians who were on this hearing, and they would ask questions that clearly showed they had no clue how to even hold a cell phone. You know what I mean?
Right.
And again, I don't get the sense of that from this guy. To some extent, I'm going to say this, I actually agree with this guy. Truly, if he was going to end up living in his mother's basement and play video games until he died, then I'm glad he got out of that, because that's a bad thing. I have mixed emotions on this, because during COVID, all of your children were almost locked up. Think of some of the younger kids. I think my child, I did the math, and it was like 25% of his life was locked up. You can't go anywhere. You can't do anything. All they had to communicate with the outside world was the video game environment, where they're playing a game and they're communicating through the communication systems in the game. I can guarantee you that a vast majority of the ministers in this cult have no idea that not only is it a video game, it's also like a cell phone. You can talk to each other. It's also like a chat system where you can communicate with each other. It's like a forum, which they may not know what that is. It is this, it's this all-in-wonder tool. It's like, your cell phone today, compared to the old world, it's like your telephone, your video camera, your microphone, your notepad, all of these things. Well, a video game system today, they even market it as your all-in-one entertainment system. It's got your television. It's got everything. If you buy an Xbox, it's literally a Swiss Army knife of entertainment, which, in the cult, entertainment is taboo anyway. Mm-hmm. But all of that said, I get what he's saying in the fact that if this was going to consume his life, that's a bad thing. Man, get out of the house. Don't stay in your basement and do this. But again, he is in a position where he is influencing people in a church. And there are children who are going, oh no, this guy's talking about they're going to take my video games. If they're even allowed in the church, you know what I mean?
Right.
And what's really interesting about this is whether this was a learned thing for him, I'm certain, because being in the position he's in as a minister in either the main sect or the splinter group that he's in, many of the older men, like you said, had no idea what is a video game, because even though video games were invented, I think it's 1962 or so, the computer systems of the 50s and 60s were so expensive you couldn't have one in every common home. So they did exist, but they were more prototype, and it wasn't until the 70s until these video games were starting to get somewhat mainstream. But what ministers in the fundamentalist religion compared them to, because again, they had no idea what this was. Many of them, no idea what technology is, because even technology is taboo. They compared them to the pinball machines. And pinball is crazy fascinating because it's a gaming system before there was a video game. And then later on, whenever electronics became more widespread, the pinball machines got electromagnets and different electronic components that as the ball went up, it would hit a bumper, and then the bumper would shoot the ball. And this was something that they are familiar with, because in fundamentalist religion in the, I want to say 1940s, pinball was just as taboo as many of the other topics that we've talked about, like movies. And it was actually, there was this theme spreading through the United States that pinball was going to take the minds of the children and rob them of their hard-earned nickels and dimes. That was an actual quote, to the extent that I can't remember what year it was, but New York Mayor LaGuardia actually banned pinball machines from all of New York. You could not play pinball in New York City because of this.
Yeah, it's so crazy because, I grew up playing pinball whenever I had the chance to do it, because I loved pinball. I didn't get a lot of opportunities to do it because most of the time it was at an arcade or someplace you had to go to, so I didn't have ready access to it in my home. Though I do remember on a home computer having Windows XP and playing Space Cadet pinball on my Windows XP machine a lot. So that's one way I had it at home, but it was more in video game form. But but yeah, because one of the things that does go on when you're playing games and any sort of things like that is you talked about the endorphins get released, and one of the things that is going on is you're getting dopamine hits. And you talk about maybe some of the darker side, and you see this going on in people who are addicted to casinos. There's nothing wrong with going to a casino and dropping some playful money, and long as it's controlled and, like you said, you're not addicted. But, you see some people, and even elderly people, who are just, you'll see pictures of this online. You got an elderly person sitting in front of a machine, pressing the button over and over and over again, because they're getting a dopamine hit every time they hit the button. And it's just, it's something that it's moved into the realm of unhealthy, where this is completely fine. There's nothing wrong with this, but for whatever reason, this person is not interacting with this in a healthy way. And some of the things in a casino are designed to gamify the dopamine release. And one of the things that you see with newer games as an industry as a whole, it's become more of a it's larger than movies these days with the amount of money these things rake in, and some of these larger corporations want to prey upon that. And so they've introduced concepts in some games where you don't release the game, you don't pay $60 for the game and just get the full game. You get part of the game, and then you got this loot box system where you pay $20 and you get a loot box, which is a virtual box that you open the box virtually and you randomly get an item out of it. And it may be the item you want, maybe it's not. But it's moving into the realm of sort of, gambling, sort of situation there, where if you talk about a little kid, like a kid 5 years old, you got more of an adult, they can interact with these things more healthily because they know what this is, they know what's going on. But talk about a kid 5 and 6 years old maybe interacting with these things, and they're like, ooh, and it's triggering something that they're not they're not ready and they don't have the tools yet to understand what's going on in their brain to know when, okay, this is maybe getting a little unhealthy for me. Maybe I should pause. And so that's one of the things where it's like, yeah, there can be an unhealthy relationship that can develop with some of these things. But if you have a healthy home environment where the parents are involved and helping the child to understand what's going on in this moment, and maybe saying like, okay, maybe some of these games that have the loot box stuff in it, maybe you're a little too young, maybe that's a little too addictive for you to handle right now. And then sometimes it just comes down to managing time. But there are ways, if you have a healthy environment and a healthy life, to interact and interface with these things that doesn't have to go into these dark places all the time. These things can have as much control over your life as you give them, but ministers like to say it's a demon or this or that. Just like our previous episode where we talked about the demonology, and it's like, no, it's a demon that's just raging control your mind and you don't have any control over it. It's like, no, you have more control than some of these ministers would like for you to think.
Yeah. I mean, we've talked about it before, but it's honestly like the gun control. A vast majority of the churches in this religious system that we're talking about are pro-gun control, and you'll see them argue it's not the gun that kills people, it's the people that kill people. And right. They'll gladly do it for their weapons, but then when it comes to something for the children that can be healthy, video games actually, we'll get into it, but it can be healthy. Because they don't understand it, they just outlaw it in general, and they're robbing the children of the entertainment, which is very, very common. There are medical professions, especially if you're a surgeon, that it is recommended to play video games because it improves your hand-eye coordination, your dexterity, and it makes you. There are surgeons the better surgeons actually play Xbox or PlayStation because their hands are so coordinated with their mind, and they can quickly, perform the surgery, get in, get out, do the job, right? But these authoritative cults, they're basically three categories of reasons why that video games are outlawed. The first one is, like we mentioned with this example, kids can overdo it. And that is, I will agree with a minister if that's the way it's presented. It's kind of in the gray area whether or not this guy presented it that way. In a normal Christian church, the minister would say, now video games can be habit forming, not addictive, but habit forming, and your children might overdo it, and in doing so, they'll miss a vast majority of their life, and they're getting more influence from the video game than they are from you, the parents. So it might be good if you keep an eye on it and make sure they're not overdoing it. That's a normal church. In a cult church, in category number one, they would say, they're going to overdo it, they're going to become vegetables, and they'll live in their mother's basement forever. Get them out of there.
Yeah.
Then you've got the historical category of person, the people who are the ministers who are familiar with the progression of the gaming systems until they reached the electronic gaming systems. And you mentioned the casinos. Well, the early pinball machines didn't have all of these holes, and they weren't designed in the same way. They did not even have the spring, I can't remember what you call that thing, but the thing you pull back and shoot the ball.
Yeah.
What they did have was you could hit these pins and knock the pins over. It was much like bowling, and they ended up putting them in casinos, and they would have like a free game jackpot. If you got the ball in the hole, you got a free game. Well, then they gambled on, could you get the free game? And then that turned into, okay, let's turn this into actual gambling. And then that progressed into the electronic gambling machines. And I may or may not know cult elite who frequent casinos.
Ooh, that's taboo.
But these men who go into the casinos and they see all these electronic games and may or may not spend their money in them, they see this and then they go back to their churches and they say, these electronic games, they're of the devil because I just played one.
Yeah. And, it's crazy because, like I said, just about any of this stuff, you can have a healthy relationship with it if it's not something that has to be the end of the world. But when you're in a controlled environment where it's all about the control of what you watch, how you spend your time, who you interact with, these things are presented as though they're demonic, and just playing the thing takes away all your control, all of your agency. And that's just not the way things are. That's just not the way things are in real life, And so it is sad to see that, so many kids, I remember going to, youth camps, and, the ministers would harp on video games and all kinds of entertainment, music and all kinds of stuff that was not, in normal circles. This stuff was not viewed as demonic and evil and going to control your soul or your mind. But these ministers would start pressuring the kids to do things with the entertainment that their parents had purchased for them. And I guess we'll let this next minister say for themselves how they think the kids should handle these video games.
Oh, Mom, I can't get over these video games, man. Kill them. Your dad got a hammer? How about a crowbar? Yeah? Okay, put them on a table and take that crowbar. Say, not my games. Yeah, your games. What?
Kill him, man. Kill him dead. So this guy is clearly in category 2, the category where there is some history behind it. He may not understand the video games, but I mentioned in the 40s, New York City banned the pinball machines. Well, the way that they enacted this, the mayor participated with the police, and they actually took sledgehammers and they just smashed the heck out of these things and dumped them. What was left of the remains, they dumped it into the rivers in the city and polluted the rivers. And, so that's in the early days, and you can kind of understand why New York City did this. You had these kids who were very poor, who were working in factories, who, they're spending their money, and the family needs the money. So I kind of get it. But then what happened gets kind of funny. Pinball machines got banned from New York all the way to Los Angeles. Los Angeles in 1939 banned the banned the pinball machines. And what happened is, you've got this wide swath of the United States that you cannot play pinball because it started out because the kids might waste their money, but it turned into this thing where we don't know why we banned it. That's the way it is. We've always banned it. It wasn't until the Supreme Court of California overturned this in 1974.
Wow.
That's pretty late, right? And even worse, even funnier, there are cities in different rural areas in the United States that continued to ban these pinball machines, and they didn't know why. They're like, we've always done it, so let's just keep doing it. Kokomo, Indiana, it wasn't until December of 2016 that Kokomo unbanned them. We're talking, this day and age, most people don't even want to play pinball, right? And so what happened was, you've got these ministers who remember smashing these things, and they told their kids, and their kids became preachers, and then their kids so there's this long history of let's smash the games because the games are fun. And it ended up, well, we don't know why we're smashing them, but let's do it because that's what we've always done.
Yeah. And one of the things that, this brings up, like I was said in the introduction to this clip, this brings up a lot of memories for me of youth camps and stuff like that. And if there's anyone watching this show right now that went to any of these youth camps, they know what I'm talking about. And you'd have a lot of ministers who would encourage you to burn your CDs, burn your games, get rid of your movies, destroy the TV in your home, get rid of all that, because that's all demonic and it's all taking control of your mind. And, you need to be in this word and you need to be getting closer to this word. And it's going to keep you from catching a rapture if you play these video games or listen to this music. And one of the things that growing up and getting older, back then I didn't really see this, but as I get older and I actually have a job and I pay for my own stuff, I think about how my parents would have felt if I'd have came home and just set fire to all my video games that they had purchased for me, because they had taken their hard-earned money and they had decided it's okay for me to have this video game and they purchased it for me, but I'm in the backyard setting it all on fire. And I say, my minister told me that this is what I should do to get into heaven. I see a lot of problems there, and I imagine my parents would have had a lot of problems with that as well.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. I mean, well, first off, the parents in a normal, non-cult, non-authoritative frame of mind, a normal Christian church is going to teach a person the skills that they need to continue through life as they enter into adulthood and get children of their own. And so you don't lead by forcing, you lead by explaining why we do what we do and leading someone to accept the belief as though it's something that is good and helpful to them, not just, you can't do that and I'm going to go destroy everything that you have. Whenever you do this to a kid, as well as I do, James, if the kid doesn't understand why you're doing it and you're doing it in a way that hurts them, like this, if you destroy the video games, they're not going to enter into adulthood and even accept what you've done to them. They just see you as this, this person who took their fun away. That's all they see.
It is so sad because, I've examining some of these things and going into some of these topics. I mean, we could go on for hours just using clips of ministers saying all sorts of crazy things. So we have to trim it down. We have to find only a few. But, I've even seen ministers, just go off on all unhinged rants on video games. And, it's sad because we've examined all sorts of entertainment in the show so far. And just when you put it all together, when you put all the various, thoughts of all the different kinds of entertainment that kids are able to interface with in the message, which is very few and all about none, depending on which church you go to. It's so sad because you see kids being robbed of innocent fun, and it's like, you could think of, that you could think of so many examples of like movies or different things like that where you're like, well, maybe it shouldn't be for kids, but there's so many things out there that kids shouldn't have any problem, interfacing with. And, one of the things that I was completely shocked to see was a minister, ranting on MineCraft. And I was like, okay, well, I got to see this. I got to see what's going on here, because this just doesn't seem logical here. But let's let the minister speak for himself and take a look.
As believers, I don't believe we should let our children be playing all of these games that are on these devices, because I don't think you're going to find any born-again Christians doing, MineCraft or War of the Worlds or whatever those things are. In fact, I did some research on that and find out that one of the most popular writers of those games is a drug addict who constantly would just get himself as high as he could get and still function, and then stay up for 36 hours straight under an anointing and write those games. And
so, James, I'm going to be really honest with you here. I have children, and they're boys. They love Legos, and the number one weapon that you can take down a parent with is a little tiny Lego on the floor. And MineCraft for me is basically playing Legos on a screen, and I don't have to step on the dang thing. So I fully disagree with this minister. MineCraft is the most wonderful thing that has ever happened to America. But this brings us into category 3, which in my opinion is the worst of all the categories. And if you put it on a scale, on a balance scale, from the guy who has a tendency to want to live in his mother's basement to this guy who's ranting on Minecraft, who probably doesn't even understand what it is, this is the category that is the worst, because it is basically rules for the sake of rules. There's no other reason for it. It is a rule so that I can create a rule. And that's what happens when you're in a cult of authoritarian control. We've got on our website, you can type in the search, go to william-branham.org and type in cult rules, and you'll see some of the rules that we grew up with. And I've had people contact me over this. They're just completely shocked. Like, why did you have this rule? This is so silly. And some of them, they were part of the rants that I've talked to you about. I don't really believe that many people followed these rules, but as the minister is ranting about this, that, or the other, and he throws in all of these evils of the world, he'll throw things in like, and you people playing bunco. I guarantee you that a vast majority, probably 90% of our listeners or more, maybe 95 or more, have never even heard of bunco, don't even know what it is.
I haven't.
Yeah. So it was a social gathering where people could go and they play this game, and I don't know the rules of it. I've not actually played it, but as these men are ranting, we've got this list, and you can look through it on the website, but no stitch and sew parties. In other words, we don't want you to get together and have fun, basically. Don't play bunco. One of the most interesting as it relates to the authoritarian control is no dice. And we all know what that comes from. It's the gambling, the people who may or may not be going to the casinos and playing a little fun game, come back and they tell their congregations you can't have dice. What's really interesting is, I don't know if this happened in your sect, but in the main sect of the message, one of the prophet's sons apparently spread this doctrine that if you played Monopoly or any of the board games and you used the dice that came with the game, the devil was in those dice and would come out and get you, and it would convert you into a gambler, and you'd lose everything that you have. I can't remember how the full doctrine worked. But instead, what he and others did, this was widespread in Jeffersonville. I'd go to a house. You see, I grew up in everywhere from coast to coast, basically. And when I moved back here, I'd go into these houses and I'd see this little box. I was like, what in the world is that? And they say, oh, we're going to play a game. And so they'd get out Monopoly or whatever, and I'm looking for, where's the dice, man? And they'd hand me this little box, and you push a button on it, and it was a random generator of numbers, in the same way that a dice is a random generator of numbers. And even more specifically, it was an electronic generator of numbers, which in fact means it was a video game.
Yeah, it's crazy because the no dice thing, that's foreign to me and my group. But because board games was one of the things that we could do that seemed to be immune from this sort of thing in my group for whatever reason. You go into other groups and it's like that's not the case. Board games are just as evil as everything else. So yeah, I guess my group kind of lucked out a little bit when it came to board games. We didn't get much else, but we got board games. But this also, talking about dice and things like that, one of the things that is kind of related to video games, because it sort of spawned, a lot of the modern sort of role-playing games, and it was sort of the spark of the imagination for it was Dungeons and Dragons. And back in the 70s, there was, the satanic panic over Dungeons and Dragons, because there was this widespread fear that started being propagated by a few people in media that it was these people were doing occult rituals while they're playing this game. And it's just, And if anyone's ever played Dungeons and Dragons or knows anything about it, really, it is so silly to think that's what's going on. I'm sure people have taken Monopoly and made it into some weird thing just because they made these weird house rules. And I'm sure somebody out there, maybe at one time, maybe played a game of Dungeons and Dragons and maybe decided to make it an occult thing. But that's one person isolated because they decided to do something weird with it. That doesn't mean that the actual property itself or the game itself is harmless. I mean, one of the things that Dungeons and Dragons at its core, it's a game of imagination. Like, everybody comes to it, they decide what kind of character they want to play, whether they're playing in a fantasy realm or a sci-fi realm. They come up with a backstory for their character, and you've got the dungeon master who takes them through this series of adventures. And it's like, okay, you encounter a goblin, and what do? Do you barter with the goblin? Do you fight the goblin? Because you got to go save somebody, or you got to go do this or do that. And it's a way of simulating, when you compare it to video games, the dungeon master is simulating the computer on the other side, the AI, the thing that's running the game for the player, and in this case, multiple players. And it's just one of those things that is harmless fun. And, the satanic panic in the 70s really did a lot of damage to that brand, because so many, even like me, I grew up without that, and I always thought of it as something that was demonic. I'd hear about it, and then one of the things that brought it back into popularity again was the show Stranger Things. Because in the very first season, the very first episode, it opens up with the kids playing Dungeons and Dragons, and so many people were like, wait a minute, that's Dungeons and Dragons? I thought it was something completely different. I thought it was something else. And then it captivated so many people, and they were like, okay, well, I want to figure out what's more about this. And then you have this wide swath of adults who are picking it up for the first time because they grew up being told that it was this demonic thing, and they were going to go on killing sprees or rampage because the demons were going to infest them in their mind and take control over them. And it's the nonsense. And this is something outside of the message, but message people would have happily adopted it because it's saying that, these sorts of entertainment are demonic, and that seems to be a very easy thing to ingest into the message. But yeah, it's sad to see, especially when you look at adults who, wide swaths of their childhood where they could have interfaced with innocent things and had fun with their friends, they didn't do it because they were afraid of the ramifications for their soul.
Yeah, it's basically rules for the sake of rules. So there's no logical reason. And it's like anything else. It's what you put on the gaming machine. If you're playing MineCraft, which is one of the most healthiest, tamest, wholesome games for a child to play, I wouldn't have trouble with even a 2-year-old playing Minecraft, man. It's building blocks. Right. I mean, they're going to sit on the floor with their building blocks, or they can sit in front of the television with their building blocks. This man has no clue what Minecraft is, or he wouldn't be saying this. But like you said with the Dungeons and Dragons, which I was going to mention that too, but you beat me to it.
Yes.
this whole swath of fear in this religion, it's fear of the unknown. And many of these people preaching it, they have no clue what it is they're preaching about. They preach for the sake of preaching, and they like to hear what their own mouth says, and they get excited about it. And you'll hear them say it, I'm preaching to you, and I didn't even know what I was going to say. This revelation come out of my mouth. And then it's some revelation like Minecraft is of the devil, man.
Yeah.
Well, they have, the listeners have itching ears. Well, I think they have an itching mouth. It's so freaky weird. But one of the earliest games that, and to prove the point that these guys have no clue what they're talking about, video games has this wide variety of what is a video game. I mentioned the dice thing. That's an electronic game, which is essentially a video game, all the way to, whenever I was in, what age was that? It's probably 7th grade. They had all over the news because the fundamentalist religious leaders had risen up against Mortal Kombat because 2 men were fighting on the screen, and you could control the men fighting, and there was one particular move that you could do on one character, and you could rip his spine out, and you'd hold the spine up, and yes, I won, I held the spine up. everybody went into this weird religious frenzy and all of these boycotts on not just the game itself, but any gaming system that had the game. Those were also outlawed. You can't play the whole gaming system and all of its 1,000 games because this one single game. And even as a kid, I'm like, really, man? It's what you put in it. Like, if I'm going to put in Minecraft into this gaming system and I'm going to play that, why ban it? Because it has a game that you could put in it that I don't have, you know? But one of the earlier games, so there are also these text-based games, and I had no idea how widely popular this was until recently. I had a client who wanted me to develop some text-based games. But my earliest experience was the Oregon Trail, which you've probably heard and played. But it's like reading a book, but it's a choose-your-own-adventure. It presents you with where the wagons are going over the hills, and you have the choice of going into the path towards the water or the path towards the plains. Which one do you want to choose? And you'd choose it, and then suddenly your wife has dysentery. That's how this game worked, right? Well, my first experience with this game, I was in a school in... I think it was either 6th or 7th grade, but the school had this technology center that was one of the most advanced in the nation in this little podunk town that we lived in. And on any given day, you'd see people from Japan or China or India touring to see what they'd set up. You could build, and I did many of these things, you could build a V8 engine. You could build a bridge and see how much weight it would take. So you were doing architecture, auto mechanics, computers, audio design, music, everything technology. And I was in the technology side. In my opinion, it wasn't as advanced as it should have been, because you sat down and you played Oregon Trail, and that was your experience with technology, right? I was bored out of my mind. Like, this game was, I was used to Miss Pac-Man. This game's no good. And so I taught myself in that class how to hack. It was my first experience hacking. I hacked into the game, and I got to where I taught myself to read the code, looking through it. And first I had to figure out how the hacking even worked. Like, I had no clue, but I started toying around with it, and I found a way to inject myself at the very, very end of the game, because I wanted to see how this thing ends. Where's this headed? Why am I playing this? And I made it to the very, very final scene before you won the game, and then I can't remember how it displayed, but it displayed these winning banners and things just as these guys from Japan were walking by, and they looked over, and the instructor who's giving the tour of the facility, he looked over, nobody's ever beat that game before. And everybody, like, there's this big celebration, and I wasn't about to say, well, I kind of hacked into it.
Yeah, it is crazy, you know, because you look at stuff like that, and you know how we're told from the minister we're not allowed to interface with these things, and then we still do, because like you said, we don't understand why this is wrong, because it's just nothing logically seems to tell us that there's anything wrong with this, especially something like Minecraft. But then you have situations where some of the kids experience whiplash as they go through their life, because just like with so many things, the parents decide, okay, this is fine, we'll let this in the household, we'll let the kids play some games, we'll let the kids watch some movies, whatever. Then some time goes by, and something happens where the minister says something like, oh, well, the video games are demonic, and, you know, and the parents come home from church, and it's like, okay, no more video games. They're out the door. No more movies. The video games are out the door. We're getting rid of them all. And you have some kids growing up in these movements who have this whiplash where sometimes it's okay, sometimes it's not, and sometimes it's okay to have fun, and then sometimes you're just like, well, I'm back to playing with sticks, I guess, because that's all I got in my life, you know. And it's so sad, like you said, the rules that have no reason, no sound reason to be there, but the parents are just as caught up in this, and they want what's best for their kids. They don't want their kids interfacing with demonic things and ruining their lives. They're trying to they want what's best for their kids. And so they hear these things come across the pulpit, and they're like, no, it's not because I'm trying to take away your fun. I want what's best for you. And I've been convinced by this minister that this is what you need to have ripped out of your life for your own good. And it sets up this vicious cycle between parents and kids that is so unhealthy, because, like, you know, the kids, they know that this is baloney, and a lot of times, and then they're like, sets up this animosity with their parents, and it's so sad. But these top-down control mechanisms just wreak havoc in people's lives in some of these ways, and it's so sad to see.
Yeah, it is sad. I mean, you know, my advice is this, James. If you're in the category of the first guy that we listened to, and you are a late teenager or however old you are, and you're stuck in your mother's basement, and all you want to do is play video games, I'm going to give this minister that. Get out of the basement, man. Go experience life. Go have fun. I mean, now that COVID is lifted, there's all kinds of fun things that you can do and enjoy life. I'm going to give the guy the benefit of the doubt. Hopefully that's what he meant. I don't think it came across that way, and if he ever listens to this, maybe he can take some feedback and adjust to, like the other normal Christian ministers would do, where it's an advice. You know, if you're going to live in your mother's basement, get out of the basement. But for the people who are controlling their kids to the extent that they're actually listening to the guy over the platform when he says MineCraft is evil, number one, this guy has no clue what he's talking about. Number two, you as a parent, it's your job to raise your children, and it's your job to make sure there aren't people who are predators who are impacting your children. And that's what this guy is. This guy he's creating rules for the sake of rules, for authoritarian control. And if you're a parent and you're listening to this kind of thing, and you've not even stopped to think, well, is this guy, does he even make sense? Does he even know what MineCraft is? If you've not asked that question to yourself, then you're probably under his authoritarian control, and you might want to get out of there. You know what I mean?
Right. You know, because that's the thing. You know, we said it before earlier in the show. There are tons of games and things for all ages. Just like we talked about in the comic books episode, where there are things that are designed for kids and there are some things that are designed for adults. You know, a 4-year-old kid probably shouldn't be playing GTA 5. I'm just going to say that's probably a little too mature, a little too old for them. But, you know, whatever. It is what it is. But, you know, when you look at things like MineCraft, you've got calm music playing around, this little 8-bit music that is so serene, and then you're taking blocks. The entire world is made up of blocks, different kinds of blocks, and you can take the block, the grass block, and place it over here. You can build structures with it. It's virtual Legos, you know, and they introduce these little obstacles by having, you know, these little cartoonish little things come out at night to add a little bit of difficulty to it. If you choose to play in that mode, you can actually play in completely serene and build mode and not even turn that on. But but there's nothing about it. There's no adult themes in it. There's no blood and gore. You can think of all these extreme things that the minister could be going after. And it's like, but see, that's where you get to when you're in the top-down authoritarian cult is, things stopped making sense when you entered the door. And when you get past that, all bets are off. And and you get further in, and soon MineCraft's going to be demonic. And it's just like, that's just the way it goes.
Yeah, I mean, MineCraft is again, it's one of the most healthy games that you can give to your kids, and it's educational. I mean, you're learning to build. It's no different than, you know, I had these erector sets, and I had these, I can't even remember what they're called, but these little blocks that you could build castles and whatnot. They had these little pins sticking out. Even as a little tiny child, you have these things. And in today's world, it's the equivalent of that without the mess. So for a parent, it's the perfect thing. So, you know, my advice, again, if you're a parent and you have a man who is making rules for the sake of rules, you're probably in a bad situation, and you might want to think about it. If you're a kid and you're listening to this show, my advice is do what your parents say, and make sure your parents are thinking. Bring it up to them. Say, Dad, do you know MineCraft is just building blocks? So if you have weird doctrines that you'd like for us to discuss on the show, you can contact us on the web. You can find us at william-branham.org. For an overview of the historical research of William Branham and the healing revivals, read Preacher Behind the White Hoods, a critical examination of William Branham and his message, available on Amazon, Kindle, and Audible.